SEC football kicks off this week. Alabama grand season preview time. It already feels different in Tuscaloosa this point this year to this point the last couple of years for the simple fact that, Colin, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we have led a single show talking about big injuries at Alabama. You can knock on all the wood you want to. My point is, that's already cause for celebration, and they haven't even teed it up. And when they do, in week one, by the way, recently released, they will be a 4-touchdown favorite on the road at Missouri. So we're not necessarily breaking down that game, but we always do the mood tracker. And the mood tracker, if I did one for Alabama fans right now, is kind of the enthused and reinvigorated hunters kind of mentality. This program rarely gets to be the hunter. I mean, most of the time, the country's coming after them. And right now, if I were to take a random straw poll of the college football public, they're talking Clemson a lot, and they should be. And they're talking Ohio State a lot now, and they should be. And the main reasons are very obvious. You got a guy by the name of Trevor Lawrence and a guy by the name of Justin Fields, and the roster around them is not too shabby either. And so Alabama's in that conversation, but because of the perceived disadvantage that they would have at quarterback heads up relative to those teams, I don't think a lot of people are crowning Alabama any kind of preseason or predicted national champion. And for that reason, we can classify them as a very rare hunter, at least as we enter 2020. Areas of focus for Alabama this year, these are the things that we here at Late Kick will be keeping our eye on. The overall identity of this offense, which ties right into what I was just talking about there. They have been the definition of high octane. Past couple of years, you had a guy by the name of Tua Tagovailoa there, and obviously they had a bevy of receivers, the likes of which you've certainly never seen at Alabama. High octane, though, equals high variance, and that has typically been what Nick Saban is totally averse to. And so now, what kind of dynamic shift might we have here? Because here's what I'm pretty sure they do have. I'm pretty sure they have, if not the best, one of the very best offensive lines on paper in college football. They go NFL across the board there. And in a lot of cases, they're NFL and they're too deep. They're very good. They are extremely deep and extremely talented at running back. And that's not anything that I think we need to guess a whole lot about. And because you have that, combined with Mac Jones at quarterback, who is good, but is certainly not Tua Tagovailoa in the arm talent department, I wonder if there's not a little bit more identity shift towards blending the new concepts that have energized that program and in a lot of ways transformed what they are offensively with an older school approach that lowers the overall variance and gives you a more consistent week-to-week outcome. I wonder about that. The second thing I'm focusing on is answering the whole Pete Golding question. If I heard it once, I heard it a million times in the offseason. Got to get rid of Pete Golding. And it was not the offseason. I mean, it was really after their regular season finale last year. Well, Pete Golding's going to be gone. Who are they replacing him with? Pete Golding's not gone. He is the defensive coordinator at Alabama today. When we talked to Nick Saban a few months ago, I asked him, hey, there's a lot of external noise about Pete Golding. I want to know how you feel about him internally. And Nick Saban didn't even bat an eye when I asked him that. He said, I'm fine with who we have here, and that's obvious, because if he wasn't, I can assure you they wouldn't be on his staff. This is the University of Alabama. There's a line out the door for folks who want that job. He's not going to waste 2 seconds with a guy in the defensive coordinator chair that he's uncomfortable with. But he said, when we did what we were supposed to last year, we were fine. That translates into we had a lot of young guys on the field because of injury that really didn't belong on the field yet. This year, some of those same guys will be on the field and will probably benefit from the baptism by fire they got last year, but one way or the other, we'll get an answer to that this year. I think you'll see a drastic improvement from their defensive production this year, but if we don't, then for better or for worse, we will have answered the Pete Golding question. Jalen Waddle, when it comes to non-quarterback position players in the sport, probably as dynamic as any. When you guys talk Heisman, which I don't a whole lot, but when you have, and you've asked me for a non-quarterback candidate, I have given you number 17 there. Colin's playing this at regular speed, but he still looks a little blurry. That's just the kind of player he is. Jalen Waddle is the kind of guy that if I could get a prop bet about scoring a touchdown on a kick return and a punt return and passing and rushing and receiving, if I could have a prop bet for a guy who's going to achieve all that this year, Jalen Waddle's the kind of guy who could do that. So he's the kind of guy to watch. He's the kind of guy who flips a football game. There are many people in the Alabama organization who think he is the best football player on their team, regardless of position. That is a mouthful. That is any given year, 6 or 7 preseason mock drafted into the first round. And that dude, they think, is probably the best they have. And the other thing to watch before we get to the biggest questions is any year at Alabama, you're asking the same question. Impact freshmen. And they got a lot of them, and they got quite a few that I think are going to play early and often. In fact, I don't think you'll have to wait past the opener against Missouri to see Bryce Young at quarterback, first and foremost. You've got a couple of edge rushers in Will Anderson and Drew Sanders that I am extremely excited to see there, as are they. Brian Branch and Javon Baker, defensive back and wide receiver respectively, who have come out of the state of Georgia, both contending for early playing time there. There is a lot of infusion of young talent going on there because they are extremely high on the class they just signed, as they normally are, that has already begun immediately pushing some multiple-year incumbents, and I think you'll see a nice combination of both. So the biggest questions for Alabama this year, number one, I don't even start offensively. I actually start defensively, and I really wonder, are they standing any chance of returning back to form defensively? I'm not talking about 2011 because the reality is offensive football has changed, period. And so you're probably not, holding people out of their side of the 50-yard line for multiple quarters like that old Alabama team could do. However, they do have elite potential. When we're talking about personnel here, they do have elite potential. The standard, though, that you have come accustomed to expecting from specifically their defensive line and inside linebacker play has been non-existent. And I'm really talking about when teams get inside the red area on them, the ability to punch it in on Alabama used to be something that if you did it, you celebrated it for a couple of weeks because not many were doing it. That hasn't been there. And it hasn't been there really because of a combination of injury and just the fact that personnel hasn't quite been to the level that it has been there in the past. And for that reason, LeBrian Ray, these are all former huge names in the recruiting world. DJ Dale, Justin Eboigbe, Dylan Moses back this year. Christian Harris in his second year has the chance to be everything for Alabama that I think Nakobe Dean will be for Georgia. Those guys, if they're all healthy, and they are as we expected them to always be, Alabama should be elite. At every one of those positions, Alabama should be elite. They got really good depth, I think, especially on the interior of their defensive line. And to be honest with you, pass rusher, I think also is an extremely deep position for them that will only become deeper as some of those young guys that were part of probably the best outside rusher class that we've seen in quite a while get their feet wet a little bit more. Second question goes straight back to quarterback. And it's not week one. Week one, Mac Jones is your starter unless Mac Jones walks off the job this week. And so Mac Jones week one, Bryce Young, I think we'll see him in pretty much every game. I'm not asking a quarterback question in the context of week one. I'm talking about week 8. Week 8, they're coming out of a bye week. They're going to LSU. We have fast-forwarded a couple of months into the season. What is the Alabama quarterback situation there? Because I tend to believe that while you have had some other battles across the country that have been labeled two quarterback situations, as we talked about last week, I view Alabama as a two quarterback situation. I don't just view it in the classical context of a 50-50 preseason battle. I view this one as the kind of battle where the more talented, the more raw talented option is going to be the backup to start the season, and that's Bryce Young. And the guy who's been there a long time and who is plenty talented enough in his own right is going to be your starter for the time being. And then we get to see every week, we get to see Bryce Young take reps, maybe in garbage time, maybe some more meaningful reps, and we get to find out what he's about. And if he is about what we think he's about, and by we, I mean 24/7 Sports, labeling him the number one player in America regardless of position this last cycle, and they don't typically whiff on those quarterback evaluations too often these days. And if you think they do, then look at his offer list if you want to confirm that. So if he is who we think he is, I wonder about midseason, later in the season, because we will have not only gotten to see Bryce Young by then, we will have seen Ohio State, we will have seen Clemson, a whole lot more than we already have, and we will have a lot more answers to the questions of what would it take to beat them in Columbus or beat them, that team up there in Clemson, South Carolina. What would it take? And is the answer Mac Jones and whatever Alabama is, or is the answer Alabama's really, really good, but they need to take it to another level at quarterback? Third question, how severe is that shift from going Tua and Judy and Ruggs to the aforementioned Mac Jones and, Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle still there, but Mechie and Javon Baker, the true freshman you just talked about, and that also ties into the possible identity shift. I don't think that combination needs to be nearly as consistently game-changing explosive as they have been in the past because of names like Najee Harris and names like Brian Robinson and names like Trace Sanders, a guy you probably should have heard about last year if not for injury. I think they'll be way more physical this year offensively than they have been in the last couple of years, and I think that'll be by design. So the schedule analysis portion of this, what we like to do is, I don't like to do the put your schedule up and just say win, loss, win. I don't think there's a lot of skill in that. And so what I like to do is I like to take your schedule and look at all your opponents, and I like to put a toughness rating, 1 to 10, 10 being the toughest, 1 being roast beef tech. And then I like to group them into different categories and simulate your season 100 times. And on average, what would your best case, worst case, and most likely record scenario be? So what we did with Alabama's schedule is we looked at it. And Colin, if we have that, let's roll with that. And what we looked at specifically is, how many 10-rated games do you have? Because for a team like Alabama, there's a big difference in a 10-rated game versus an 8-rated game. And Georgia is the only game I have them playing that is rated a 10 on the 1 to 10. As you see, though, they have 4 games rated 8 or 9. They got 4 rated 6 or 7, and they got 1 rated 5 or less, and that is that game at Arkansas in December, by the way, to end the season. Hey, weather forecast could change that. The best case, worst case, and most likely record scenarios for Alabama this year. Their best case any year is 10-0, and it is no different this year. Their worst case is 7-3. Their most likely record scenario, our models spit out 8.75 and 1.25 on average per 100 simulations, which obviously we had to round up. So we are going to predict Alabama to go 9-1 this year. And that concludes our grand season preview for Alabama football in 2020. I hope you were entertained. Please come back.